I'm Shay, and welcome to the Common Good Pod, a podcast launched by the Faith in Action Network, the largest grassroots global faith-based organizing network, where we tell you what's going on in the world through the lens of faith and what you can do to get engaged. Today, we're going to be breaking down what the government shutdown means for Black and Brown folks in our country. But first, here are a few news stories that went down this week that you should know about. So, first up, NBC News just laid off about 150 staffers this week. And among those hit the hardest were teams that focus on the stories about Black, Asian American, Latino, and LGBTQ plus communities. Now, according to people familiar with the situation, the move essentially shutters the dedicated units behind NBC Black, NBC Asian America, NBC Latino, and NBC Out. Now, those sites will still run stories about their prospective communities, but there won't be full teams devoted to them anymore. Maybe a few newsroom staffers at most will pitch in to keep some coverage going. Now, this decision comes as NBC News separates from MSNBC and looks to streamline its operations, marking a major shift for the network and a big loss for representation-focused journalism. Perilous times we are in. Speaking of perilous times, the Supreme Court may be getting ready to chip away or even get rid of a major part of the Voting Rights Act, the law designed to protect the voting power of Black voters and other minorities. During Wednesday's hearing, the conservative justices questioned whether efforts to boost the voting strength of minority groups actually crosses a constitutional line. Now, this all started in Louisiana, where Black voters sued over having just one majority Black district. The courts agreed they deserved more, but now some non-Black voters are suing, saying the fix took away their rights. A decision which could fuel a wave of new gerrymandering is coming next summer. And lastly, after outrage about a racist chat that also featured rape jokes leaked from the Young Republicans Telegram, JD Vance has come to their rescue. Text messages were full of racist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic content, including jokes about gas chambers and slavery. Vance said the jokes were edgy and offensive, but kids do stupid things, especially young boys. I just want to note the age of the people in the group are 29, 27, 31, 24, and 35. So there's that. He also said their lives should not be ruined for a mistake. And I do want to note this is the same JD Vance who encouraged folks to call people's jobs who joked about the Charlie Kirk assassination so they could get fired. Here's the segment we do call someone who is on the front lines of social justice, telling us exactly what they are seeing on the ground. So we are in the third week of the government shutdown. Democrats and Republicans continue to blame each other while the government remains at a standstill. We know exactly who President Trump is blaming. Meanwhile, layoffs have begun affecting thousands of federal workers. Today on our show, we are joined by the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, political director at the Faith Action Network. She's an AME minister on staff at Metropolitan AMC in DC and a lifelong advocate for justice. A native of Alabama and daughter of a civil rights activist, Dr. Gould has led major faith-based voter engagement efforts for predatory lending, and even testified before Congress. Her ministry, Beyond the Walls, calls faith leaders to move from the pulpit to the streets, building communities rooted in liberation and equity. She is here to discuss what this shutdown means for our siblings in the Black and Brown community. Dr. Gould, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Che. Glad to be here.
All right, so let's just start from the top. What exactly caused the shutdown? Like, how did it come to the point where the whole government's just sleeping on the job?
Sleeping on the job is a really good way to describe what's happening right now. As we're recording this, we are, as you said, in the third week of really what I would describe as two major crises, one political and one moral. This shutdown is literally about who gets to actually thrive and who doesn't. It is the way in which a particular regime, in this case, the Republican Party, if we're honest, is actually trying to consolidate power towards authoritarianism. The shutdown occurred because one party is not willing to actually extend healthcare to ordinary Americans who deserve healthcare. So instead of actually being willing to negotiate and to make sure that the most vulnerable people in our communities, in our family, in this country have what they need, access to health care, that the sick are able to be tended to. They decided in the case of Congress not to even come to work, right? Congress is literally been out longer than the government has been shut down. But unlike many of our siblings, people in our families, people in our congregations, people in our communities writ large, they're getting paid. But so many government workers are not getting paid. And so it is literally political theater on the back of the most vulnerable.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So just kind of going with that, the back of the most vulnerable, obviously it affects everyday people, but what makes this one tough, especially for people of color?
So Malcolm X once said that when um, white people, America catches a cold, black folks get pneumonia. And so I would add to that Black people, Latino, Asian, queer folk, other folk of color uh, get viruses, right? They suffer pandemics when the rest of the country have colds because we are in systems that were never designed to serve us. In fact, we live within systems that were literally designed to oppress and, if we're honest, kill us. So it makes it very unbearable. There is still a racial wealth gap in this country. So there are people who already were behind. It is said that the average American does not even have $400 in savings. If the average American, and normally when they talk about those numbers, they're not talking about us. They're talking about the average white American, right? So if they got $400 in savings, that means many folk of color have no savings, right? They may have $40. And you couple that with missing a paycheck or two, and it actually becomes literally detrimental. It is so the shutdown is one thing, but why they are shutting down because of this refusal to extend healthcare credits in December 31st of this year. 22 million Americans will no longer have access to premium credits for their health care, those who get their health care in the marketplace, people who are paying for health care. So many of them will be without insurance, and the rest of us will have increased insurance premiums. So, couple that with you're going to miss some paychecks. The president has said not everybody will get back pay. I wonder who will be first up not to get the back pay, right? In an era where all things black have actually been struck down, including taking people's names out of history, names off of battleships, and etc., erasing military accomplishments. So we are once again in a place where the country has his knee on our backs.
Mm. Yeah, I know you're already talking about the ripple effects. I was reading that clinics are scaling back. There's delayed in food assistance, holds on housing programs. Is there anything else you could talk about as far as other ways this is showing up on the ground?
Yeah, I would say on the ground, I lived a lot of my life in St. Louis, in Missouri, and I got a text just last night. I pastored an AME church there, two churches for 10 years, and I got a text last night from a young former parishioner who received SNAP benefits. This parishioner is working on a nursing degree, has three children that they're raising, and and works every day full time, right, going to school, um and supplements, right, supplements the cost of food with necessary SNAP benefits. The parishioners shared with me something that they got from the department that runs that program in Missouri, that says that the governor of Missouri has indicated that there will be no SNAP benefits in November. Can you imagine? First, on in any month, but going into winter months, going into even a holiday season, which means children are out of school a few days and etc. So even if getting food at the school actually helps, right? They eat lunch at school, they maybe eat breakfast at school, so maybe you're only responsible for dinner. They're home during the holiday season. Now they got to eat all of their meals there, and you don't have this life sustaining uh supplement, right? You don't have this life sustaining supplement to help you buy food. What kind of a world does not want children to eat, right? What kind of a world is that? And that is the kind of world that we are living in, a kind of world, a kind of country that is more intent on this consolidation of power than on actually allowing people just to live, right? Just to live and have the normal necessities of life, not luxuries, but the normal necessities of life. So that is one example of what this impact is doing. In my role with Faith in Action, and as a preacher who's often called to spaces to preach, to teach, I fly a lot. TSA agents, some are working, but it has also caused, some more issues with travel in an era, in a year where travel is really scary, if we're honest. And it is just a ripple effect. And I don't know that we will know the full impact until the aftermath of this, right? Some people will not be able to survive. Rent will be due on November 1st. And some people may not actually be able to survive. I suspect that unfortunately, it will contribute to the number of people who are unhoused in our communities. And
Mm,
as I said, Congress is out.
yeah. Yeah. I know a lot of those federal workers who are now furloughed or working without pay are Black workers. Can we talk about maybe the unique challenges that they're facing right now?
Yeah, and many Black workers in the beginning of this year, after this administration took office, one of the things that were noted, as many of these folk have been shut out of jobs all during this year, right? Folk were doged. Um, and there's over 50% of African Americans who are middle class are government workers, right? There's one statistic that says that. And so if I am middle class by the standards that are set, normally that means, particularly in Black and Brown families, that I'm not just supporting myself and the people who live in my home, but I'm actually also being a support system for other family members, right? I'm being a support system, if it, sometimes for adult children, sometimes for nieces and nephew. I call it the Cash App Ministry. I'm part of the Cash App Ministry. My nieces and nephew, particularly, are like, "Can I hold this until payday?" Right? Well, payday, if you're a government worker, isn't coming. And it is also my background. I spent almost 20 years in finance, and I entered this work through advocating for control of predatory lending. And I'm certain that there will be more predatory lending going on, that people will start to get, will be preyed upon by these financial bad actors who also now are not regulated because the administration has attempted to actually dismantle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so again, who's more likely to, if my wages are lower already, even if the government is not shut down, but my wages are already lower, right? Now I am missing paychecks. Who's more likely to actually have to go to a lender that is subpar than people of color? Not only are you more likely to go, you're actually courted by them. If you go into a community, that is more white or affluent, you don't see those little stores with the blinking signs around, get a loan here. Those stores are only in our communities. And so there's an arrangement that already preys upon us. And so when times are uncertain, when we live through financial uncertainty, we're preyed upon even more, right? And as I said, if we have less income, it automatically means you have less savings. You're taking care of folk generationally. When I talk to immigrant siblings, oftentimes they are literally taking care of two or three generations, sometimes in one house, right? And so if that check is missed, multiple people are actually suffering, including children going to school without food.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, to that, just thinking through that, like long term, I imagine this does, damage for people, economic, uh, long term. I feel like this definitely does damage to people's economic stability. I know a lot of families count on federal jobs as their steady, like middle class pathway. Like, what happens next?
Yeah. And there's a lot of uncertainty. It remains to be seen. The moral thing to do, the moral thing to do would be for the would honestly be the party that is in charge. The part and our work is nonpartisan, but there is one party that is in charge from the White House to Congress to the Senate, for that party to actually not play partisan politics, but to actually cross the aisle and decide to negotiate and actually give people the health care that they deserve, right? Healthcare should not be a political issue. And so when we talk about like who's going to pay the price, it is going to be those TSA agents. It's going to be federal custodians. It's going to be the one thing that people don't always talk about is people who have federal contracts. Sometimes we think of those contracts as, the big engineering contracts and the systems contracts. Oftentimes, in the cafeteria of federal buildings, there is some small business owner of color that has the contracts that's making food there for people who work there to enjoy. Those contractors will not get back pay. Those contractors literally are losing. Oftentimes, their most lucrative contract is now on hold until the government goes back to work. Often, the janitor who is cleaning the building, the custodians, the maintenance staff, those are often contractors, small business owners of color with those contracts. And so their ability to provide for their families is also interrupted. And so it is the longer we play partisan politics with people's livelihood, with people's health care, with people's nutrition, it is really a deadly game. It's really for people of color, Black people and other people of color, it's being shut out twice because we're already shut out. And now
Yeah,
we're shut down, right?
Doctor, I don't believe in coincidences, but is it a coincidence maybe that all this is happening with the rise of Christian white nationalism?
No, it's not a coincidence. It is deeply connected, right? White Christian nationalism, and I want to be clear for those who may be listening, it does not mean white people. It is a construct of whiteness, right? White Christian nationalism is the religious arm, the religious arm of authoritarianism, right? It is literally the vehicle that is used to reach the masses, as well as the vehicle that is used to nurture the very notion that some of the people who are here are made in God's image and belong in charge, and others are supposed to be oppressed. It is where they find nurture and where they find cover. And so if we're not talking about faith in the context of what is happening politically, we're actually missing the boat. And I know, even as a faith leader, faith is a tricky situation because most of our institutions have made it really bad for folk. The church and other faith institutions have made it bad for folks. So folk have left the institutions, but many of them have not left God or some notion of a higher authority. But we have to talk about faith in this context because faith is literally intertwined with politics and they want it to stay that way.
Um, I imagine for a lot of people in this country, for our listeners, this is scary. How can our listeners and just in general, how can folks who feel powerless in this situation, how can they help? What can we do?
What people need right now, so I think you're right. We have been inundated not just in the we're probably on day 18 or so while we're recording this, not just in the 2 to 3 weeks that the government has been shut down, but all year we've been inundated with executive orders that were designed to actually stop resistance. Executive orders that were designed to reinforce the myths that this country was made for wealthy, white, at least heterosexual presenting men. Um, we've been inundated by that, and it really has an effect. And so, while we're also recording this, the Supreme Court is deciding once again voting rights in this country are somewhat like if you've ever rented when it's time to renew your lease, there's always the chance that something changes in the contract. And so it's as if we've leased those rights, and the Supreme Court continues to decide to change the contract for us. So I can understand the angst, even the sense of hopelessness and helplessness. What we really need in this moment is what Faith in Action is built on, folk of not just of faith, but folk of moral courage to actually start to use their platforms, whether it's a podcast, using your social media page, particularly to my colleagues of all stripes, all faiths. If you are a faith leader, you should be preaching, teaching, and talking about these issues and giving people the tools. People need to see an above ground resistance. Yes, rallies like No King's Day, that's another story. But people need to see that folk of faith and folk of moral courage are not allowing the fraudulent notion of white Christian nationalism to have the last word. People need to feel a sense of belonging. It is a great opportunity to create communities of belonging, spiritual and political homes, because people have felt disenfranchised in this country for a long time, right? We talk about, political scientists talk about this notion of backsliding democracy. Um, I mean, how can you backslide from somewhere you never were, right? So many folk have been feeling that for a long time. It is a great opportunity, a clarion call to be community. I would call it beloved community, to get together, just to be in connection with people so that people are not in isolation, so that we might think together. We actually, and I say this, I've been with a lot of trepidation. In the beginning of this year, I pushed back on when people are like, we've been here before. Well, we kind of haven't, but there is some history around folk who have actually fought back under really bad circumstances when they were dehumanized and etc. And so there are lessons to be learned globally. Many of those people in other countries actually came to learn from particularly Black ancestors in the civil rights movement and even before then. So there is opportunity to resist, not just with our words, but these words will matter. But there's opportunity to actually, I'm thinking of like the Target Fast and other opportunities that we might have to boycott bad actors, people who are actually paying for troops to be in our streets and etc. People who are supplying um, those kinds of things, people who are even contributing to some of the authoritarianism, the white Christian nationalist communication platforms and etc. We can literally resist with our dollars, right? And if you are a faith person, you have any faith practice, there's also like the spiritual realm, but we need to get together and collaborate. And as Frederick Douglass would say, pray with our feet so that people can actually have a way. We need to build on ramps for people, places for people to engage. Not everybody's going to get in the street. For some, it's actually too dangerous to be in the street. And for some of us, we don't trust the folk that are in the streets with us. So, but you need to build community, figure out how might you build on ramps to engage other people, whether it's through small house meetings, other digital platforms. We need to be together. There's a chant that I learned in Ferguson that is used, all across the movement. The people united will never be defeated, but we have to be united. We have to be united and to work really hard to actually make sure that authoritarianism does not have the last word.
I have to ask, you mentioned the No Kings March coming up. Do you have thoughts on that?
I'm a black preacher. I'm rarely speechless. Um, I have thoughts. So what I am really appreciating in this moment is that there is a lot of energy around like, oh my God, this is so terrible, right? So I am appreciating that people are using the energy to demonstrate a visible opposition. I am inviting those, particularly the organizers of those kinds of events, to actually broaden the tent. And I'm also inviting them to work with organizers, right? People who don't just mobilize and get people in the street, but to work to actually train people, so or to connect with people whose work, Faith in Action and other networks, whose work is around training people, organizing people, and engaging people over a trajectory of time to build the kind of power that we need. All of these actions that we're seeing, from depending on how the Supreme Court rules, to troops in the street. I live in DC. I can barely walk outside without seeing troops in my neighborhood, and it's really frustrating, right? Faith in Action, we were in LA in the face of troops there at Delaney Hall and a few other places where troops and ICE have been activated. Um, in this moment, we need disruption. And so for the No King organizers, no shade, and others who are organizing the kind of energetic rah-rah rallies, we need people to do more than go to the streets in a righteous indignation parade or protest. We need people to organize collaboratively so that we might disrupt that which is happening. So that is the invitation, honestly.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing too? So
Of course you can.
I was at the Supreme Court this week, right? You when you introduced me, you said that my mother, a voter rights activist. She was a student who was a volunteer, right? With SNCC, and I looked around, and there was a crowd there. There were busloads of people. Most of the people looked like us, and that's great. And I wondered, I wondered. I was sitting in a room with folk who talked about, that we had 5 million people on the last No Kings March. I wondered where the righteous indignation was from folk who are not people of color to come and stand with those who've always had to fight just to be in this country. So there's an invitation, as I said, um, not to be complicit in the way in which this country has always arranged whiteness and to join in the fights that have always been.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much for your time. Can you tell our audience how they can keep up with you?
Absolutely. Across platforms except X, you can find me at Rev Dr. Gould, Gould. I am pretty active on most of the socials.
Awesome. Thank you for tuning into the Common Good Pod, where politics meets purpose and faith fuels freedom. If you believe in a higher power and in helping your fellow human, then you're already a part of this story. Join us at faithinaction.org, because when soul meets strategy, we move mountains.